Paddy, hi. How are
Hello.
you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Good, good, great to be speaking to you today. So,
And you?
jumping right in, I understand that you started working in seaweed generation and algae sinking in 2021. Why
Yep.
was that important for you, and why is it important for the planet?
Oh, good question. It's kind of a bigger answer, I suppose. So my background's in software engineering, and I spent a couple of years out in lovely California during 2018 and 2019, and it's
I see the
ancient
vibe.
history
I
now.
see
I
the
know.
vibe.
Yeah, like
It's
it's now as hot in London as it is in California.
summer.
And that happened to coincide with a couple of fairly big wildfire seasons, which have since been outdone a couple of times over. But that really kind of got me thinking about climate change and what do we do really in the future. Um, and, and I started to do a bunch of research, and I fell completely in love with seaweed as a general concept. There's a lot to love there, right? Like seaweed, it grows in the ocean, it doesn't need fertilizer, the oceans are woefully utilized. I wouldn't say underutilized, but we overutilize them in certain ways, underutilize them in others. Um, and seaweed has a lot of the answers to the things that we're looking for the future. You can make fuels, plastics, fertilizers out of them. You can make cosmetics. Animal feed, and they can rehabilitate areas where biodiversity is lacking, and a lot of our natural seaweed kelp forests have died over the last well, alongside everything else, over the last like century or so. So
Mm.
there's lots and lots and lots of massive potential out there in the ocean, and seaweed was kind of my entryway into that world. um and so I started to research and try and figure out kind of what we might do, how we might go away around getting into the world of seaweed. And I started a podcast, much like this, much less like the technology that back then wasn't as good as it is now. And I interviewed or I victimized a few people to come and talk to me about seaweed. And my first victim was my co-founder, or turned into my co-founder, Mike Allen, who I think you've met, who is a professor of algal biotechnology and feels very much that I do, that the future of a lot of our future materials and sustainability, or living sustainably with the planet, is going to have to work with the ocean in some way.
Yeah.
And he had been working with this really grotty, stinky seaweed, which was kind of the opposite end of the spectrum that I was coming at it from, called sargassum, which is a invasive seaweed. Not all sargassums are, but this one is an invasive seaweed that grows in the central Atlantic region and sweeps sort of back and forth between Africa and the Caribbean. And
Mm.
it's the largest seaweed bloom on Earth. It's about maybe up to like 100 million tons a year, and
Wow.
it's fine when it's in the middle of the ocean. It acts as a habitat. You know, fish use it as cover, and but when it comes into the coast, it can inundate coasts,
Mm.
pile up, um, just rots and creates anoxic zones. As it rots, it steals oxygen from the
Right.
water around those areas and kills everything.
Wow.
So Mike said to me, "Figure out what we can do with this seaweed, and let's do something." So I went away and I thought about it quite a bit, and came back to him with the idea of carbon dioxide removal using this problematic, what for all intents and purposes is a waste material. Um,
Mhm.
and so as seaweed grows, in some areas it can grow faster than rainforest. It absorbs carbon, in some cases faster than rainforest. So for carbon removal and carbon balancing of our atmosphere, it could be really useful. So that's where we started. How are we going to deal with all of this really stinky, massive tons and tons, millions of tons of seaweed, and turn it into something useful, in this case, carbon dioxide removal? And from there, we sort of, well, we've had a very, very long, well, it feels like a long journey. That was 2021. We're now in 2025. So we've been doing this for like 4 and a bit years. And the the opportunities in the ocean and the opportunities with seaweed remain very pertinent. Um,
Yeah.
and we got very, very into robotics and automation, and how you would use robotics and automation to deal with invasive species, or to deal with
Uh-huh.
beneficial species, or indeed to even really understand what's going on in a space. And so we've
Yeah.
gone on this really big journey where we're going to fix the world by sinking this bad seaweed using automated robotics. And then And then
Yeah.
everyone says, well, what will happen if you do that? And we say, well, let's go and have a look at that. And then we built a solution to be able to monitor things in the ocean and to be able to understand what might go on in different ecologies. And where we've ended up really is working with making technology that works in the
Uh-huh.
ocean with the species that are growing in the ocean to understand what might be going on there, and to really kind of build the technology for tomorrow to be able to work with the ocean in a way that makes sense,
Yeah.
as we start to transition away from fossil fuels, which I'm still hopeful we will do in time to not destroy everything, but let's see.
Well, it just sounds like my understanding of your background is that you started like you moved over into this industry in 2021, right? But between 2021 and 2025, it does feel somewhat like we've lost momentum. And part of it
Mm,
is for environmental factors. We had COVID, then we had the war in Ukraine, then we had the war in Palestine. Before that, there was so much activism around the need to
mhm.
make change and reduce our emissions. And we had the student protests and maybe the wildfires in California. Also alerted everyone to the gravity of the problem, and not just there, of course,
Yeah.
all over the world, flooding in Bangladesh, and yeah, just lots of disasters around the place. How do you think it's a high enough political priority? Do you feel from the business side, because that's the side that you're on, do you
Mm,
feel like you've seen the impact of that deprioritization? And what do you think needs to be done?
that's a good question. So I think there's different levels to that
I don't
question.
mind when a human tells me that, but sometimes like I'm like asking AI a question and they're like, "That's a good question." I'm like, "That's so patronizing. I'm a human being." Like, of course, it's a good question.
I'm not an AI, I promise. No, I think
No, I'm
I think
like-
it's a really multifaceted question. I think, and you sort of, I think that the wildfire seasons that happened in 2018 and 2019 were very shocking to people. And actually, the situation has gotten worse, right? Like, I was in Spain
Yeah.
last October when they had the worst floods that they'd had in
Yes.
100 years, and people were stuck in basements in Valencia, and they all drowned. And that happened in Spain. And now, I'm sitting here today, it's the 29th of April, 2025, and
Yeah.
there are blackouts in Spain and Portugal, and
Yes.
there have been terrible wildfire season, another terrible wildfire season, especially as far as finances are concerned in LA. And so the
Yeah.
situation
Yeah.
isn't getting better, but I think what's happening is two things. One, we're getting distracted by maybe more immediate term
Immediate.
issues,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we're normalizing to it. Another disaster happens.
Mm.
Oh, another one. Oh, yeah, and I do wonder how far it has to really go before we actually do sort of stop and sit back and take action, and really kind of reprioritize that again. That said, things are still happening, right? All of this energy that went into climate change and making a sustainable future back in 2021 is now kind of coming into fruition now, and human cycles are much shorter than the
Yeah.
period of time it takes to actually kind of see those changes. So things are still happening. A lot of companies and
Yeah.
innovations that were funded and started out in 2021 are still going now. And
Yeah.
in the UK, I feel I'm a dual UK US citizen, and
Yeah.
I'm very, very happy to be doing this in the UK because there is more of a measured, realistic approach to what might we do next. And lots of government funding does go into things like what might we understand fish stock without destroying entire
Mm.
habitats? How might we continue with offshore wind, create floating wind? And those endeavours don't just go away because they aren't top of the news cycle. So, but be
Right.
reassured that they are still
That is
happening,
reassuring.
and that it will come to a flaw again. There will be, and
Yeah.
I, this will not be a good thing. This will probably come off the back of another large disaster that people find it very difficult to ignore. But those efforts continue. The policies are
Yeah.
moving in the right direction. There are very big distractions from this, and I would say the Trump government is, probably taking up more news cycles than anyone
Yeah.
else at the moment for whatever reason. There's different things going on there, and as
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
person who's working to try and make change in the world, it has felt for the last few months like no one cares because everyone
Mm.
is, all of the news cycles are being sucked up by what's happening in the US, what's changing, all of these big things that are coming through. But I do think that the Trump government is doing, in some respects, is doing the space of climate change and future sustainability a favor in some ways, because none of these efforts are going to
Interesting.
continue unless they make sense from a business perspective. And
Right.
I don't think that Trump is particularly interested in the environment, but he is interested in
Making
making
money.
money, yeah, and in anything that's going to be good business. And
Yes.
climate change as a way forward must make sense from a whole bunch of different reasons, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because it provides cheaper electricity, because nature actually is valuable, thanks very much. Like, how are we going to eat if our soil is degrading, and if there is no biodiversity, and if we are emitting millions and millions or billions of tons of carbon in order to produce the nitrogen and the fertilizer that we need for the soil.
Mhm.
So it is happening, and it will come back to the forefront. But I think, well,
Yeah.
I'm going to tell, I say this to myself every day, but I'll say this to everybody else who's working in this space: is just keep putting one foot in front of the other. The eye of Sauron will come back to climate change at some point. It's really
Yeah.
just a cyclical thing. Like, you can't, and I actually think it's probably good, because you can't keep banging on the same drum and have people listen on an ongoing basis. They need a break. They need to
Yes.
go away and think about something else. AI, the Trump government, and it will come back. Like, climate change hasn't gone anywhere, has it? Like, it's still a massive
No.
problem. Um, and
Yeah.
I do think that the policies that have been put in place by the EU and by the UK government are continuing. They haven't gone anywhere.
Okay.
There is some rollback from the
Great.
American side of things. Let's see what happens there. There's plenty of people still working on these issues, and they haven't
I
stopped.
think it's also quite interesting. Yeah, I also wonder from the international perspective, not to get sidetracked into this, but it sounds like also reputationally, if China's going to begin to be doing more on climate change,
Yeah,
then the US must then kind of compete on those terms also. So it'd be interesting to see how that global competition, if it could spark a bit more action and a bit less inertia on the topic,
yeah,
because they're both
absolutely.
very huge
Well, actually, I do
actors.
think that China doesn't get very much recognition for what it's doing, but actually is extreme. It's really pushing on sustainability, especially from a solar power perspective. And I think the
Right.
Chinese government actually does recognize that it is good business, and it is what the future of business
Oh,
will
yeah.
look like. So I,
Yeah.
I don't know enough about global politics and economics to know exactly who is now the world's leading power, but China's certainly pushing against America's crown, shall we say, pretty hard. And
Yeah.
it might well be that climate change is the tipping point for it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Um, from a national perspective, from the UK side, as a business working in renewables and on pioneering tech, just out of interest, really, what do you think the government can do more of to support businesses like yours?
So they talk about, and this is something that people used to talk about when I first started out of business. Like, there's valleys of death for businesses. There's like 7 of them. Um, and
Oh God.
I know you're like, what, 7, really? And when you first start out, your biggest worry is like, where am I going to get funding from? Where am I going to build a team from? How is
Yeah.
like the technology going to start out? What's the market going to be? And then you can sort of like
Yeah.
go out and solve all of those problems, and then you get to a point where
Yeah.
you're sort of ready to start small scale sales and customer stuff, and that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And there isn't a lot in that space. Like, for example, in the ocean, I think is especially tricky, because you've got things like
Yeah.
um DEFRA and the Crown Estate and all of these enormous petrochemical companies. And there aren't many small players who might interact with a small startup and say, "Oh, let's
Right.
give your technology a shot." It's either you're talking sort of
Right.
billions of dollars or $0, and you're like, well, then
Right.
something in between those things would be good. And we've been lucky enough to get quite a lot of Innovate UK funding, a lot of it from DEFRA,
Yeah.
and you
Right.
sit down with the team from DEFRA who run these programs, and they're like, "We're a horrible customer. We're a horrible customer.
Yeah, I see.
We don't
I
deal with
see.
people unless they're worth, however many millions, and they're able to deliver a project that is worth like hundreds of millions of dollars." And you're like, "Well,
Yeah.
okay, how about 10?" you know, what about 10,000? Like, what could is there something there? And that's a really tricky gap to traverse. And it
So they're supporting you, but they're not creating markets for
Yeah,
you, or they're not a customer for you,
exactly. And
which limits
that's
the ability to be
true of
sustainable and scale.
so many.
Yeah.
You sort of you probably, and this is a guess, my, again, economics research very bad, but you've got a lot of very big companies in the world, you've got a lot of very big organizations like governments, and you have a lot of startups, and then the sort of that medium size is like, that's quite tricky.
Yeah.
And it's not just governments, it's also, we're lucky enough to be in the Asahi sustainability incubator at the
Yeah.
moment, and Asahi is one of very few corporations that you have.
Asahi, the beauty
Yeah.
brand.
Yeah, so
Okay.
yeah,
Cool.
they're doing some really cool stuff, and it's pretty small
Oh,
scale,
awesome.
but they're trying to
Ah,
fill in gaps in their supply chain that they see coming in the future. So for us, it's
oh, awesome.
seaweed cultivation in the ocean, feeding into
Yeah.
packaging, which feeds into Asahi's packaging itself,
Yeah.
and and there aren't very many of those. There aren't very many very big
Right.
corporations saying, let's talk to small startups and cultivate the industry that needs to exist for us to become more sustainable in the future. And I think
That's
that's something
amazing.
that
That's so cool.
it's really cool, and it's really cool that they're doing it.
Yeah.
That's something that
Yeah. Yeah.
isn't really being incentivized by the government. And I actually think if the government could do
Yeah.
something to incentivize large corporations to take risks on their supply chain, even in a very small way, with startups that are going to be
Yeah.
able to solve sustainability challenges that they know are coming. It's not that none of this is going to be a
Yeah.
surprise to them. They know exactly, what their
Right.
emissions are, what their plastic wastage and
Consumption is.
consummation is, and they know exactly what interactions they and their suppliers are having with nature through farming and through, you know sometimes destruction of environments, and sometimes through just
Yeah.
doing things in a monoculture, very damaging
Yeah.
kind of way. So they know all these things, and I think incentivizing them and helping them to put their money where their
Yeah.
sustainability research is going would go a really long way. And there's a lot of stuff that's happened in the US which has been sort of wound back by the Trump government now, but the IRA was an enormous piece of very very high financial incentives for corporations to work with startups. So more of that would be, I
Yeah.
think, really helpful.
Yeah, hugely. I mean, I think thinking to our experience as a brand, um, I think it sounds like, globally we're on top of the measurement problem. We measure, we know exactly how much we're emitting, we know where it's
Hmm.
coming from, and the rest of that. And we are too as a brand, so we know how much we emit and so on. And we calculate that annually. And then this is how we came across you, because we're working with one of the, I think your partners, Carbon
Hmm.
Removed. And I came across Ocean Kelp Forest, and I was like, this is really cool. Let's put some of our removal budget
Mm.
into that. Um, but yeah, it does feel like there is something there. Like there's no, it would be really, I mean, we were tiny, especially when we started this. It was just important for me to do it. But there's no real incentive to do that. It's just completely off my own
Yeah.
bat. And
And
if,
now they've made the
yeah, if,
reporting so onerous that you almost need a full-time person to be able to do that. And that's just completely backwards. Like,
yeah,
I think, I suppose you can hit people with a carrot or a stick. I would do this with my kids with the parenting as well. You're like, are you
yeah,
going to be persuaded by bribery, or are you going to be persuaded by punishment? And like, I'm much more of a carrot
yeah,
person. And so I think
yeah,
if you offer businesses incentives to work with small startups and to
yeah,
improve their sustainability,
yeah.
it's probably going to
You
be
will
better
induce
than
behavior.
making them fill out Bibles worth of paperwork. Um, you know,
Probably, but then you feel like you're doing less, right? Someone somewhere needs to receive reams of reports that they'll never read.
someone needs to take up all the paper. I mean, really, like, Otherwise, the paper industry must be declining. Like my kids get through a lot, but
I
otherwise,
know.
most of these things are electronic now, aren't they?
That's it.
Um,
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit from our general skepticism and yeah, despair at government bureaucracy. You're a female founder working in a pioneering aspect of tech, like new
mm.
area. We're all still trying to figure out how it works and how to grow it and to make it economically viable and sustainable. Um, how lonely is it, or not, for you? Are there lots of women like you? And what do we need to do to encourage more women into STEM careers, so into science, technology, maths, etc.?
Um, so I mean, I describe myself as the opposite of lonely on a fairly regular basis. And the reason for that is that I'm privileged enough to work with some of my very dearest friends in the world, and I think that sort of on a day-to-day
Amazing.
basis, actually, it's the
Yes.
people that you work with that are going to be your sort of input. There are lots of really inspiring women, I think, especially in London, who are working in sustainability, and men as well. You know, I'm very happy to be friends with men as well. I think the journey, I think one of the things that you, as a person in this position, whether no matter where you're from or what gender you identify as or whatever, like it is just having the responsibility to make big decisions about your company and about the direction it's going and about who you need to work on it is just inherently a thing that lands on your own shoulders. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of support out there for um, different groups of CEOs and people who have founded these things, and there's lots of different wonderful people that you can bring into your company. But I think ultimately you just have to
Yeah.
sort of accept that responsibility. And once you do that, it's actually not that bad. Um,
Yes.
and I think the other thing is to encourage people to come into these industries, especially women. I found it really interesting over the last few decades that there are now more female doctors and more female lawyers than there ever were
Yeah.
before. And I think the reason for that is that those are secure jobs that women see,
Right.
you know, way back when they're young, and they go, that's what I'm going to do. And they, it takes them a couple of decades to qualify and get there. And then you end up with this large number of women working in one of those industries, which is proven, safe, good, a good pathway forward. And the same has happened a bit with tech, right? Like software engineers, there's
Yeah.
way more software engineers, female software engineers than there have been before. Um, and I think it's a risk aversion thing generally. Like women tend to be a bit more risk averse than men, and therefore what you see
Yeah.
happening is reams of men going into a particular industry and making a load of money and being very, very successful, and then being followed by a lot of women. And that's not always the case. Like I know plenty of women who have been very
Right.
successful in tech. um, but what I would say to any woman or any girl who's watching this is take risk. You know, it's actually more risky not to take those risks in the long term, because you might end up in an industry that's actually almost kind of over by the time you've gotten to a point where you've qualified in it. Um, and
Yeah.
if you're looking at tech right now, like there are loads and loads and loads of people, not just women, who've gone into tech, and now
Hmm.
there's these waves of redundancies kind of coming through, and it's all this very,
Yeah. Yeah.
everything is completely uncertain. So the only thing in life that is certain is change. And so if you can get used to the idea that things will change and you can try and get ahead of some of those trends, it's actually the upside is huge. And it's worth, I would say, taking those risks. And I think the other thing that I see this with my kids, right? Like I've got one boy and one girl, and my boy loves math and my girl loves English. And it is, and I don't think it's not something that we've done, right? Like we
Yeah.
aren't sitting
Yeah.
there going, oh, Finn loves math and Theo likes English. It's just how they are naturally. So I think from a parental perspective, there's lots that you can do to sort of say, actually, like, let's sit down and we'll do your sort of counting with you. I mean, she's only 5, so it's like counting in tens is kind of where she's at right now. um
Yeah.
and I think sort of encouraging girls to be a bit more STEMmy, and encouraging boys to be a bit more, English and humanities at an early age probably will help quite a lot too. Um, but
Mhm.
it does often feel very innate. And I did English and humanities
Yeah,
and then retrained as a software engineer later on in life.
of course.
And so
Yeah.
I think there's something in our education systems and that we can do at home with our kids to sort of really, encourage those skills.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think, I have mixed views about whether it's innate or it's cultural. I certainly don't think it's like the problems in the parents at all, but because I come from a different culture where actually it's very normal to have female engineers.
Hmm.
They're virtually 50% of the class, and mathematicians and the rest of it. It's just it's interesting not to see that here, and it is yeah. So I'm not sure I've gotten down, to the bottom of what exactly it's because of, but I think it's super complicated, and you have to play to your kids' strengths and what they like.
Yeah, which I find very interesting. Like we for better
Yeah,
or worse, and without really intending to at all, we've ended up with like a
yeah,
very pink girl and a very, dinosaur loving boy, and you like,
yeah, 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 for
and you
sure.
don't, and I don't think it's something that we've done.
Yeah,
It's their surroundings, their peers, but I think there's
100%.
just sort of keeping the doors open for both of them to be able to go and keep doing
Exactly.
both, I think is
Yeah.
really, really important.
And normalizing it too, because there is a stigma that scientists look a certain way, and if you're a female scientist or you're a female coder, you have to look like a certain thing. Well, you can wear your frilliest
Yeah.
pink poofy dress,
Oh,
as long as it's lab safe.
yeah,
But
yeah.
like, the point is, you can be yourself and have the confidence that you want to have and express your style in the way you want to, and then also do the things that you want to do as well. I think it's still a message that needs to be,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
people.
I mean, I've always hoped that having me as a mother will sort of,
A role
as a
model,
role
yeah,
model
for
will help. But
sure.
I actually think that parents are so uncool that it might go the opposite direction.
I think you get a solid like 10, 11 years of cool, and then it's downhill
Yeah.
from there. So
I've got a
right
couple
now,
more left.
you're in your cool phase. Yeah, exactly. You've got a few more. You're all right. Let's see how that goes. Actually, it's quite interesting. We're having like this discussion for Mother's Day next month. But how do you feel? Speaking of like the impact of
Mm.
parents on people, how do you feel your mom affected your sense of style or confidence, or
Oh, I'm
your
very lucky. My mum is absolutely amazing. So my mum was a single mother, mostly a single mother. I have a
yeah,
wonderful stepfather as well. But my sister is just actually a massive badass. She's a really highly qualified surgeon. And actually, I think that both my sister and I have the confidence that we have because of our mum. And I think well, there's a couple of things that are really important. I think first, like being loved unconditionally is really important for any kid. And then secondly, I think she's always had this sort of innate, unyielding faith in both of us. And it really is like a great source of confidence. So I'm very thankful for my mum and everything that she did and still does now for us.
yeah. I think it is interesting. Risk taking, though, I feel is that's the one thing that I could have probably learned a bit more of, or seen modeled as a young child. And I do wonder if it is the point that you made earlier is, as a female in this field, if you're experiencing redundancies, you want to change, take the risk, trust yourself.
Yeah.
And I was given a lot of confidence in myself, but not enough confidence to take risks, I
Mm.
think. And I think that's definitely something I had to learn over time, that it's okay to take risks. And if you have confidence in yourself and your judgment, you will be fine. You'll land on
Yeah,
your feet. You'll make
absolutely.
it
Yeah,
work.
yeah. I mean, and I suppose actually for me, I saw that happen, when my mother divorced my father, and that was like an extremely brave thing to do, but absolutely the right decision. And it was best, for all of us as a family. And that that's probably one of the biggest risks that you can take. But my mum,
Yeah,
she
100%.
made
Wow.
it work, and I think as a result, both my sister and I are quite comfortable with risk, probably more so than average people, or more so than on
Yeah.
average. But yeah, that was a
Yes.
very formative experience, I would say.
Totally, that makes a lot of sense. And she sounds like a very strong lady.
Yes, very.
Just to round off, what's next for you and what's next for Seagen?
So I suppose whilst we're in this slightly hibernating stage of climate change, and the, I suppose, movement that we are part of, we're just putting one foot in front of the other, trying to
Yeah.
nail our technology and get it into a situation where it's works really well and that we have really good product market fit, and we can then
Mm-hmm.
start to grow it before people get very worried about climate change again. And when the wave comes back, be ready
Yeah.
to take advantage of it.
Great. And what can we, brands, consumers do in the meantime, whether it's to support you directly or indirectly?
Um,
What's your
what's my
ask?
ask? Gosh, I don't know. I think well, I mean, keep track of what we're up to. We've got lots of deployments going out into different ocean spaces to be able to monitor them, and we're putting all of those all of that data up onto our website so people can see. But I think it's really a case of, shop mindfully. If there's an area around you where you can make a difference, whether it be some nature rehabilitation project or an area of water that needs litter picking, just small steps every day. Keep it in mind, and we will get to a point where we're more positive than negative, I believe, at some point in the future. So everyone will have to be part of that.
Absolutely, for sure. Kicking or screaming,
Well, yeah.
we'll have to.
I
Hopefully
mean,
not.
hopefully
Hopefully it's
not.
more
Hopefully
carrot
it's
than
less.
stick.
Yeah, hopefully it's more carrot.
But you think you're absolutely right. There's
But
too
I
many
think
people.
there's I there the cost that we take on the planet, and that we take on nature, and that we take by emitting, is going to become baked into everything that we do and buy and
Yes.
are in over time, and hopefully it will happen gradually, so it's not just like a sudden shock. But life
Yeah.
is going to need to change in a whole bunch of different ways, and I'm not saying everyone should go vegetarian tomorrow, or that we should all, eat nothing but like what you can grow in your own garden, but that the cost of things is going to start to bake that in, and I think the system is going to start to shift, and I hope that happens slowly enough for it not to be a big shock. um
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Although I think I'm a bit more pessimistic than you. I think we can continue burying our head in the sand and subsidizing industries and whatever so that people feel like everything is fine when actually it's not.
Yeah,
So, but I hope you're right. I hope you're right. It gets baked in slowly and gradually over time, and that people get used to having more sustainable lifestyles, and governments get used to really grappling with that on a policy level, because nobody wants to deliver a bad message and say, look, your costs are going to increase because of
yeah.
this. Everyone's going to
I
avoid
mean,
that.
that's
But
really, a massive source
for
of the
sure.
issue is that, like, the politicians' timeframes are different from climate timeframes, and so that's sort of why I do think that there will be some big shocks that lead us into proper action. And I
Yes.
hope that everyone who started all of their technology innovations and journeys are kind of in a position where, when that does happen, they're ready to really like get started, and ready, or not get started, but ready, really ready to scale and start to, make a big difference. But we'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers
Well, thanks,
crossed.
Paddy, for all your work. And yeah, looking forward to maybe seeing some of the projects go live. It'd be really cool to see it in the flesh. And in the meantime, wishing you lots of luck. And yeah, looking forward to
Thank
speaking
you very
soon.
much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.